Welcome everyone to the fourth issue of SWIPE SciComm Magazine. Today I have the great privilege of interviewing Brian Palermo. So who is Brian? Brian is an American character actor, science communicator, improv instructor, and a comedian. He has appeared in a number of TV shows, commercials, and movies such as The Social Network, Happy Time Murders, Entourage, and Friends. He's a member of the improv group called the Groundlings in Los Angeles, Hollywood, and he has co-authored the amazing book Connection: Hollywood Storytelling Meets Critical Thinking. And he runs his own consultancy called Palermo Improv Training, and he helps scientists all around the world improve their communication skills. Brian, it's a great pleasure to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Tulio. Thank you for inviting me on, man. I can't wait to chat with you.
Fantastic. So I've known about your work for many, many years. I read the book Connection when I was probably in my last year of the PhD. And that book had a huge influence on my career. It really opened my eyes to the whole world of science communication and storytelling. And it made a huge difference because before that, I had never received any communication training. And really, I didn't know where to even start. And this book gave me that amazing and but therefore,
yes.
which is, I couldn't see as useful as the Swiss Army knife.
It is.
And then it inspired me to try improv, which is something we're going to touch on later. So it had a very profound influence on my career. And if I had success early on communicating my own PhD research, I think I owe it a lot to that book because when I started making videos about my PhD work, they would not have been as effective if it wasn't for the storytelling principles and other ideas in the book. It really made a difference. So in my company, it's compulsory reading.
I can't wait to start receiving residual payments from you since you've gotten so much.
Yes, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about it later. Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So, Brian, after having known about your work for years by reading the book, finally we had the pleasure of meeting each other by pure coincidence in Palma de Mallorca in Spain at the ASLO conference, which is a marine science conference. We were both invited there to give our trainings. You were talking about your improv content. I was talking about scientific posters. And it was great to actually meet you in person and have the chance to sit in the audience during your workshop. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
I wrote down in my notes during the workshop a quote from you. You said, "Scientists tend to have a yes but mentality, and they love to prove people wrong and school them." Very true. I used to be one. I can confirm. The problem is that, with half of the world not believing in climate change, if we as a scientific community don't embrace a different mentality, we're not going to get out of this.
No.
So what is the antidote?
The antidote is communications training, learning how to speak more effectively, how to make the science more accessible to non-science people, non-science fans, laymen, people that don't have and I don't have any science background myself, except I'm a big fan. I'm a citizen scientist. I love all my science cohorts. I love to teach in that world because I like science and nature, but I don't have any real training myself. That whole yes, but sort of quote that you mentioned there. And I'm surprised and gratified to hear that people actually pay attention to my workshops well enough to quote it back to me. That doesn't happen that often. But very often in the science community, the best way you can learn is to have Socratic dialogues or to have actual debates and argumentations about the subject matter to sort of distill it down to, okay, well, this part is not true, this part is not true, this what's remaining is truth. And people in the science world are very comfortable with that, but people outside of that world often immediately tune out and turn off because they feel like they were scolded or they feel like they were just told how wrong they are, and they no longer want to engage in that subject matter. So, a science communicator might feel good for a second that they were able to correct a person, or add some specificity or some better truth to the conversation, but often that stops the conversation. So yeah, you got to make your point, but that message is not going any further because you just turned off your audience. So the whole yes, but, and when you're working in a collaborative sense with science partners, the best service you can do is to point out things that they might have wrong so that they can correct them before they publish or before they, go to defend their dissertation or whatever it might be. So very often people in the science community think, well, here's some wrong information. I should fix it. I need to fix it. And that's true. You need to fix it. But not with this attitude of, no, you're wrong. This is how many microbiomes live in the jellyfish's belly, blah, 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 blah. As soon as it comes across as a scolding, as soon as it comes across as a correction, which may make your audience feel less intelligent, that there's a lot going on in there, they tune out. And now it no longer serves you as the communicator, because instead of correcting someone and giving them new information, you've turned them off and they're not listening to you anymore. Even if they're looking at you and smiling and nodding, they've turned off in their brain. So it's a very difficult concept for a lot of my science communicator friends, where they think the best thing they could possibly do is correct any information that's wrong. And again, that's important, but how you do it is important. It's almost more important than the act. So how you do it, I would suggest, goes towards these vital interpersonal communication skills that I teach throughout, the science and tech cohorts. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, it does. So if and but doesn't work, what do we need?
Okay, so the word "but" you mentioned earlier in the setup, the "and," "but," "therefore," which was devised by Randy Olson, who's a partner of mine that brought me into this whole world of science communication. And that's a narrative structure template, as you know, but for your listeners, you start with an agreement. Turtles are green and seaworthy. Then you hit the audience with a contradiction, but they are losing habitat. Therefore, we must protect the reefs, whatever. It takes almost any of your scientific data and puts it into a narrative form, a story form that's easier for your audience to understand and digest. So that's one piece of the word "but." However, but when you apply it to interpersonal communication, that word "but" comes across as, again, a disconnection. It's like, I hear what you're saying, but what I'm saying is more important. Or I hear you, but I'm smarter, I'm better, I've got the more current data. And again, that disconnects. So the thing I teach, and I'm not alone in this, there's a lot of improv training now out there, is this fundamental of improv theatrically, which is called yes and. And the yes and mindset is not a literal program. You cannot literally say yes to someone who is wrong. And I had an anecdote about a young student who was a flat earther, and I didn't believe people still existed. But this was a young comedy student, so it was, yeah. Anyway, so you can't say yes to someone who believes something wrong, but the mindset of yes and is, yes, I hear you, yes, I see you, yes, I'm receiving you, and this is what I'd like to add to this conversation. So for my flat Earth friend from years ago, I would say, okay, I understand you actually sincerely believe the Earth is flat, and here's why I don't. Satellite pictures and explorers and facts and physics and all this stuff, as opposed to saying, no, you're wrong, which also implies you're stupid. You're also it lends to a negative stereotype of scientists being condescending or arrogant because they have a lot of information. And the way it's delivered is often through this authoritative, impartial, unbiased, non-judgmental, very logical, rational, all these adjectives that scientists have built their delivery around for 100 years or so, works against human connection, and it works against communication for that reason. So the yes and mindset is what I teach to try to get science people to connect with their audience first. Like, okay, I understand you believe XYZ, and this is the facts that you might want to rethink that because of, as opposed to, you understand XYZ, you're wrong, you're bad, you're stupid, you're not up to date, I'm the smart one. All those things most of my science people are not trying to infer or imply that at all. But your audience often perceives it that way. And that's a huge disconnect that you may not be aware of at all. So this idea of a yes and mindset is a way of just setting your own communications brain towards, okay, I'm going to listen to this person, my partner, my audience, my colleague, whoever it is. I'm going to listen to them. I'm going to see what do they connect to, what do they care about, and then I'm going to say, yes, the turtles are wonderful and seaworthy, but they're running out of nesting space. So we got to blah, blah, blah. But it's a yes and situation when you're communicating, one-to-one. So yes, turtles are awesome. And yes, they need a nesting space. And they don't have it. They're running out of it. So we need to, set it up, fix it, whatever it might be.
Absolutely. And I will add to that when we give people this impression that we're not really listening to them and we're condescending and looking down and schooling them, all that we achieve is that it backfires. They entrench themselves in their position even more, because nobody likes to accept that they're wrong,
No.
And
So
nobody does. And so they entrench themselves, and it's a well-known phenomenon called the backfire effect.
Oh, is it? I didn't know it had a name.
It had a name. There's a brilliant podcast called You're Not So Smart that has a series of episodes on the backfire effect. If you're interested in learning more, all of you listening, that's a great podcast. You're Not So Smart. Search for the backfire effect. Very, very interesting stuff. And yes, it's exactly what you're saying.
And it also goes hand in hand, Tulio, with the next piece that I often teach, which is emotional intelligence, and using some emotion when you deliver information. As I mentioned, that litany of sort of general scientist demeanor is you're trained to be impartial and rational and unbiased and all these things. But how that translates to an audience is, well, what I'm saying is not very important. If it were important, I would gesture and I would scream and I would raise my voice, or at least show some concern. Scientists are trained to show no emotion, to just present the facts. And that's great if you're only talking to other scientists. But if you want to reach anybody else, you want to use your emotional intelligence to express yourself as a human first, so that your audience trusts you. So you earn some credibility there, and they listen to you more. And that makes your communication more efficacious. That's my big science word I like to throw at you. Efficacious.
All right. We'll let you get away with one jargon.
Thank you.
I will add to that, as a scientist, when I look back at my first ever scientific conference,
yes,
I remember, I gave my very average presentation because back then I had no skills in communication. And then I looked around and I was like, well, actually, others are not so much better. Zero emotion, like you mentioned. But there was this one guy that was different. There was this one guy that instead of showing graph after graph after graphs and overloading people with data, he had this slideshow on showing all these pictures of birds that had gone extinct, appearing one after the other, with well spaced, so that people had time to take it in. And I still remember it today, from 8 years ago. Why? Because it made me feel something.
That's it.
The only presentation of the whole conference that had an emotional charge. And what's the impact it had? I still remember it today. I don't remember any of the other ones.
Excellent example. And the first thing we should talk about with improving your science communication is that if you're a scientist, or when you're investigating science, clearly you do have to be impartial and unbiased and objective and all the things we mentioned about. But when you go to communicate that science, it's a different mode. It's a different modality. So you go from investigating science, where you need to be rational and logical and not emotional at all. But as soon as you turn around to try to communicate to other human beings, that's when you need to use heightened emotional intelligence. And it may just be, if your baseline of delivery is a 1, and my crazy delivery is a 5, you might just want to go up to a 3 or something. But utilizing some of your emotional intelligence, expressing a little bit of emotion will draw your audience in. And my favorite anecdote to tell is, climatologists have been telling us about the crisis for 30 years. The science, I understand there's, some disagreement, but basically for 30 years, we've known this, and not a lot of action across the world that was very effective. And in the States, particularly, half of the citizens didn't even believe climate change was an issue, as opposed to, and that was delivered scientifically, impartial, unbiased, as opposed to Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish activist, who is not a scientist, and she just uses all emotion. It's just rage and disappointment and anger and fear, and that drew so much more attention to the cause, to the subject. So I always want to make this very clear. I'm not suggesting any of my science communicators try to go as big as an activist. You've got different parameters that you must follow there, but you can try to express your information with a little bit more energy so that your audience realizes, oh, what they're talking about is important. Because if you're not talking to another scientist, they will not automatically infer the import of your data. You've got to tell them that. And if they think like, well, this guy's just talking about stuff, he doesn't seem too upset by it or too excited by it. They just talk about, I guess it's just stuff. Your audience doesn't get why it's important stuff. So using a little emotional intelligence goes a long way in communication.
Absolutely. So true. I'm nodding a lot in this podcast.
Good, not a lot.
Okay, so improvisation comes with a whole set of skills. And I think they're very powerful for anybody who's interested in becoming a better communicator, scientist or otherwise, anybody really.
Across the board.
And I tried it. After reading Connection, I got inspired and I tried it. I signed up for an improv class in Adelaide in South Australia.
I love it. It's very courageous, Tulio. I'm proud of you.
And I went there for, I think, a good 4 months. And above all, it was a lot of fun.
It is. It's very loose. So for any of your listeners who don't really have a good idea of improv, very briefly, usually the reference is theatrical entertainment, comedic, it's supposed to be funny. That's when you're performing improv for a comedy audience. But the skills that you need to do that comedic performance are also applicable to interpersonal communication skills that have nothing to do with funny, nothing to do with humor or cleverness or being a good writer or a performer in any way. It's just the skills that are necessary for improv theatrically apply so well to human connection and human interpersonal communication. And one of the first ones is listening. So if you and I are thrown up to do an improv scene together, I don't know what you're going to say, and you don't know what I'm going to say. Improv is working without a script, creating theater without a script. So without a script, I have no idea what you're going to do, and nor do I. Right. So I've got to listen to you and say, oh, this is a father-son scene and someone stole a car. Great. Now I can add to that. Now I can contribute and collaborate and create with you because I'm taking in your idea. Yes, we are father-son. Yes, we are stealing a car. And I've got, the stolen aquarium full of fish. We've got to get out of here fast. Whatever. Right. But the yes and comes into play, active dynamic listening comes into play, and certainly emotional intelligence comes into play. But all of those skills can be applied to communication. And that's what I teach.
Absolutely. I think the word is transferable skills.
Very good. Transferable skills. They are indeed. Yeah. I always resort to applied elsewhere, but transferable is better because it's shorter.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know. Doing it when I was still in my PhD, it was so refreshing because, in the labs there's so much seriousness and honestly even some mental health issues were quite widespread. I'm sure researchers listening will agree to that. And going to this improv class was like allowing myself to release my inner child.
Yeah.
Stop my rational brain and just go with the flow. It was really fun and liberating. And now that I'm thinking back, I would like to sign up again and do some more of it.
You should. You should. It's a fun hobby. You don't have to have any intention of performing. It's just the act of doing it. And I'll offer my theory as to why it's so liberating is because when you work in the sciences, or I work with a lot of technologists as well, just anybody who has to deal with information that is important. You can't get the information wrong because it changes everything, right? So your day to day is your brain is just filled with logic and getting things right, and it leads to a lot of perfectionism. And this idea of then make up a theatrical scene with somebody you don't even know, that's completely foreign. It's so uncomfortable. Your brain's not used to it. So when you engage in improv exercises, just for fun, again, nobody's trying to be a movie star. You engage in improv exercises, you are practicing neuroplasticity. So your neurons and your synapses and all your good stuff that my neurologist would correct me on, instead of going to the normal references you do, you're allowed to just play with it. It's like, oh yeah, we stole a car. Well, that's not a thought that would ever come to my brain because I'm not a car thief. It's like, well, for this 3-minute scene, you're a car thief. Go for it. And the beauty of it is none of the content matters. All the content is disposable. So this is a huge weight off the shoulders of my science cohorts, whereas your normal content has a lot of stakes to it. You can't play around with it. You've got to be precise. You've got to be not only precise, but it's got to be supported by X amount of data, and it's got to be peer reviewed, and you want to get published. And the information is so sacred that you don't play around with it at all. So to give yourself, an hour to go and play these games where the information doesn't really matter. We made up a story about a turtle that went on vacation to Mars. Yay, who cares? It's great, but taking the pressure off of the content allows you to practice these other skills. Yes and mindset, active listening, emotional intelligence. You don't have to worry about the content being right or wrong because it's a turtle vacation. Who cares, right? So you don't have to worry about the content. That allows you to practice the communication skills. And that's always a joy. Yeah. So I'm glad you enjoyed it so much. It's very uncomfortable to do when you've never done it before. A lot of anxiety that you need to manage. But I constantly try to manage anxiety for my students by repeating what I just said. Is like, the content doesn't matter. If you make up a story about an octopus that goes on a parachuting trip, terrific. Who cares, right? But you get to practice connecting with another human being, listening to them, not trying to plan what you want to say because you don't know what the octopus is going to do next. You've got to listen to your partner. That's being present in the moment, which is easy to say and it's very hard to do. Pardon me, hard to do, because often we're in our heads thinking about what's the next thing I want to say. So even while I'm listening to you and you're talking about, how much nitrogen fixation, the garlic hat, whatever you people talk about, you're talking about real stuff. My brain is just going, okay, right. What's the next thing that I want to say? I want to talk about nitrogen fixation in trees as opposed to, vegetable, whatever. We often go to what's the next thing that I want to say. And even if I'm smiling and nodding and looking at you, I'm just thinking of, I'm in my head, I'm in my brain, trying to come up with that next statement. And in that way, you're not giving full attention to your partner, to your audience there. So you're, again, disconnecting, and it doesn't serve you as a communicator. That's why that yes and mindset and active listening is so important.
Absolutely. Shall we demonstrate it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Shall we do a quick yes and sequence?
Let's do a quick yes and sequence. What is your discipline? I've forgotten.
Well, my PhD was on baby fish getting lost at sea because of ocean acidification.
Oh man, you're a lot of fun at parties. I can't. Tell me more about the death of baby fish because of ocean. Okay, all right. I know nothing. I know nothing about baby fish and all that, but you know too much about it. So let's make it something different. Let's make it baby giraffes. Let's say it's something about a baby giraffe. That's all we need. Okay, you want to do yes and?
Yeah, let's do a yes and. You go first. Yeah.
Dr. Whitaker, the giraffe just gave birth here at the zoo. We got a new giraffe baby.
How amazing. We are so lucky to witness this. And what I'm seeing is that it's a boy.
It is. Look at that. Look at that. And this is very important because we need more males in the giraffe population here at the zoo.
Yes, and this is great. That means we can save this species from extinction.
Whitaker, that's so important. You're right. And we're going to get a Nobel for this. No question.
Absolutely. Nobel Prize. I can see you giving a TED Talk.
Well, that would be the small part of it. And here's the thing, Dr. Whitaker. I've named the giraffe after you. This is Randy.
Oh, thank you so much. That's amazing.
Yeah. Now you give him a nickname.
There's something I haven't told you. I've discovered a little beetle that eats poop, and I named it after you.
Oh, thank you. I've always wanted to be connected with a dung-eating bug. How dare you? Yay! Drop it there. I'm so glad this came up, Tulio. I don't know if you even caught it, but I set you up with, now you give him a nickname. I call the draft Randy in honor of Randy Olson, but I said, now you give him a nickname. You didn't respond to that. You went to the thing that was in your head about nicknaming a dung beetle after me, right? That's a perfect example of how keen your listening skills have to be. You know, you don't want to be in your head thinking about the next joke or the next line. It's just, what did my partner just say? How do I connect to that? And that connection facilitates communication. That's great. That was fun. I haven't done it ever.
Yeah, and you know, you can't go wrong really. And it's, if it crash and burns, you just have a laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Again, there's no stakes to it. There's no stakes to it, as opposed to your real world where there are a lot of stakes. Many of you are working on species extinction, any of the polycrises that we're all dealing with right now. Is like you're dealing with sometimes life or death stakes, sometimes global stakes. You know, you're dealing with a lot of heavy material. So I would also offer, that's one of the reasons why you probably enjoyed the improv class, is you get a break from the heavy material and you do a baby giraffe scene for 10 minutes. You know, it's a nice break from that.
Yeah, I think it's good for the mental health of many researchers.
It is. It's very therapeutic to spit it out, you know. And you're practicing cognitive flexibility. It's really good for your brain. There's no way to engage in these exercises without being cognitively flexible, right? And that's something that many of us don't practice purposefully. So this is a way of adding cognitive exercise in a very playful and almost no stakes way.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, so you could work with many types of people. Certainly corporates will pay you more than scientists, but you decide to work a lot with scientists. Why is that?
I'm a fan. I like science as I'm not even a citizen scientist, just as somebody who's curious about the world, but I love nature. So any of the sciences that fall under that purview, a lot of biology, a lot of ecology, I'm learning some system stuff, all the marine, I do a lot in the world of fisheries and marine bio, just because I'm a fan, because I like dolphins. I like scuba diving. You know, it's just stuff that I enjoy to do, made me really appreciate and respect and love pretty much every scientist I've ever interacted with. And that's a cohort that I enjoy being with and I enjoy teaching. So Randy 13 years ago asked me to create a 2-hour workshop using improv exercises to help presentation skills for some scientists in Southern California. And I said, sure, yes, and of course I will do it. But I'd never done it specifically for scientists. But I did that short workshop and it was great and everybody responded well to it. And I felt like I was offering something helpful to people whom I respect. And then from there, I've just started building up more and more. And that's what I've done for a decade now. So I love to drop the fact that I've taught at JPL, which is NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. I've taught at Monterey Bay Aquarium. I've taught at the San Diego Zoo. I've got to interact with some really cool institutions, as well as I got to go to Palma de Mallorca with you, Julio. So it's a bonus and a benefit in my life. And I love talking with scientists. I also enjoy teaching the comedy stuff as well, the theatrical stuff and the corporate stuff when I can get it. But these days, after doing 30 years of comedy, I'm really more focused on my science pals.
Beautiful. I also feel the same. I like to, you know, well, for me it's a bit different because I come from academia myself, but I also realized that scientists tend to be purpose-driven people, not money-driven people, and that they're much more enjoyable to have around and
I agree.
interact with. Yeah.
Scientists are smart, they're thoughtful, they're adventurous. I mean, I don't know a scientist that didn't spend 6 months out in the swamp collecting, larvae or whatever. It's like, you got to be an action-oriented person. You got to go out into the world and do stuff. And I always enjoy talking to my scientists for that reason. The corporates, yeah, I love working for corporates too. I'm just not as connected to the content. It might be, some kind of construction thing or plastic manufacturer, and I'm very happy to get the job, but I don't really connect to that content. The science stuff I always enjoy, even when, and it's almost 90% of the time, it's way over my head. I just miss a lot of the science content, but I love learning it, even if I only pick up a tiny bit. So I don't know, that's how I got into the world, and I just love staying in this world.
And over these years, have you witnessed any transformations? Have you observed researchers before the training, after the training?
A little bit. So often I'm brought in to do a workshop, and it may be 2 hours, as I mentioned, or it might be a one-day workshop or whatever. But then I go away, and I don't get a lot of recurring feedback from that group. But once or twice I have, and once I taught in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I happen to be from New Orleans, but this was in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And it was a group of ecologists and city planners. So the city planners might have been engineers, but I'm not sure what their science take was. But the ecologists, clearly it was ecology. And they were working on, public green spaces, adding more public green spaces and the health of the aquifer, that blah, 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 all this stuff. But this one woman scientist, who's a veteran scientist, I should say, she had been teaching and researching for decades, a very long time. She came to the training, and she was very, very dubious about she just the idea of, I'm going to have you do improv exercises. A lot of scientists just turn off immediately. So she was very hesitant at the top of the workshop. And after we did all these things we're talking about, heightened emotional intelligence, yes, and listening, she took that to heart, and she said, all right, I've been doing the same talk now for X amount of years. I'm due to give it again this week at another convention or whatever. I'm going to try to apply some of these new things that you're talking about. So she did it, and she actually changed up her talk, and she went off of the order of her memorized order that matches up her slides. And she went with what the audience was showing her. And by that, I mean, does the audience look engaged? Keep going. Do they look bored? Are they on their phone? Change your tactic, because you're not going to shove that information in their brain if they're not engaged. So she used a personal anecdote, which she said she had never done before. She used a little bit more emotional expression around how much she cares about the aquifer, as opposed to, these are the stats about the aquifer. This is the alkaline level and blah, blah, blah. She talked about how she loves the ponds and she liked to go fishing with her dad. Added some personal anecdotes to it. And after all that, she said it was the best that talk had ever been received in like 11 years or something, because she used some of these techniques. So I wish I could credit her. I don't have that woman's name, and I apologize. But that's one example of somebody who applied these things, and it seemed to make a real difference for her.
Beautiful. Not hard to believe at all. It makes so much sense. Okay, so what's ahead for you? What are your future plans and projects?
I got a few more gigs on the docket, I should say, on the calendar. I'm teaching for NPS, which is National Park Service here in the States, and I do a lot for them. But this one, I'm going to actually fly out to Boston and do a training for a lot of their people. And they've got a whole slew of different interdisciplinary scientists. So they've got a lot of bio people, but they also have archaeologists and ecologists and geologists, everything. They've got a little bit of everything, because the parks interact, historians. Anyway, so I got a training for them. I'm doing a training for a new excellence in research excellence. It's called I4, but I don't know what the rest of the acronym is even for. I do them in November. Just picked up another one in Arizona. So I'm traveling a bit and doing some of my science communication stuff. And then I'm also doing a big improv comedy festival in October, I believe, in Maine. So, and that's how my thing goes, Julio. I get a gig, and then I don't work for a month, and then I get a gig, and then I don't work for, so it's always kind of catch as catch can. But these are the things that are coming up. And then I also teach occasionally online. I'll teach comedy classes or whatever I get hired for.
The gig economy, as you
It's
said.
a gig. Because I came from the entertainment world, I was an actor for 25 years. I'm very used to the gig world, the gig economy, because you could go on 100 auditions and maybe get one job. I did that. I had a horrible percentage of booking, but I made enough money to live off of it. Thank God. So I'm very used to, hustle, and nothing's happening. And then you finally get something. And I don't know if that's analogous to, scientists in your world. I know I've been taught that certainly when you're getting your PhD, you're getting any of your degrees, there's a lot of hustle. You got to do a ton of work, but you may not get funded for that next step. You may not get hired. You may not get invited onto the research team that you want to be, on. So that part must be analogous is you do all the work. There's no guarantee that you'll get funded or get hired or anything. So even that must be close to a sort of gig economy thing. But yeah, I'm kind of all over the place within improv world.
I never considered academia as a gig economy, but yeah, in the way you describe it is, because there's a lot of uncertainty. Yes.
Yeah. See, I just gave you a new idea. This is neuroplasticity. I just pushed on your neurons a little bit. Academia as a gig economy.
It's a mind expanding podcast.
It is, man. And we're gonna go deep. Well, I'm sure because not all scientists want to be a researcher. Some want to teach. Some never want to teach and only want to read. Some want to be in the field. Some only want to be in a lab. I know a little bit about the difference of it all. And what people have told me is, I wanted to be on this project, and I did not get invited on this project. So I'm doing this instead. Hopefully, trying to get back to it. It is somewhat gig. I mean, you might have longer gigs, but is it common these days for someone to get a job when they're 30 and stay there until they're 65? I doubt it.
Pretty much unheard of.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that what can really help you making your career more stable as a researcher or even a science communicator is improving those communication skills.
Oh yeah.
Because guess what? When you have a grand panel review, like a review panel, if you're the one that communicates clearly,
yep,
and makes people feel something and makes them engage and stay awake after many hours of reviewing boring written grants, well, guess what? You have a better chance of getting funded.
Absolutely.
So it's communication is really essential here. And when I look at my wife, who's a biomedical researcher, very successful. She has a very good success rate with grants. Why is that? Because she's a very good communicator.
It makes a huge difference because, again, you're going from within two modalities when you're investigating science versus when you're communicating science. And that's a whole different skill set that we've talked about for the past hour or whatever. And the idea that if you want to get funded, you need these soft skills. And I don't mind the phrase soft skills. Some people immediately think that diminishes the value of the skills. So if you prefer, I also like to offer these skills may be soft, but they're vital. Like it's like your brain matter. As far as I know, it's soft matter, but it's vital, right? You need to have these, or you won't get funded. You won't get hired. You won't get public. Whatever your goals are only going to be assisted by better communication skills. And I get that it's not easy. It's easy to talk about. It's not easy to do. You got to put time and effort and practice into it, like anything, because you could, read the theory and listen to our podcast and learn some tidbits and stuff. But until you go and actually do the thing, make eye contact, open body language, use your voice a little bit differently, express a little bit of emotion, listen dynamic, until you practice those skills, you haven't learned those skills, so you're still going to communicate in your normal way, which might be less efficacious than you want it to be.
Exactly. Okay, I feel that by now lots of listeners will be like, oh, this is great. I want to give this a shot, and perhaps I want to come along to one of Brian's trainings. So where can people learn more about your work, Brian?
Well, I've only got the one website is palermoimprovtraining.com, and it's just all shoved together. There's no spaces there, and that's kind of my basic landing page. But every once in a while, I'll update it with open trainings. Generally, I get hired to do trainings for specific groups, and they're not public. They're not open to the public. But when, like Aslo, when I ran into you, that was open to anybody who was attending that meeting. Clearly, Aslo has another ocean science meeting in, I believe, February in New Orleans. So I should plug that. I should be in New Orleans doing the same workshop that you saw in Palma. That's OSM, Ocean Sciences meeting, I think. So it may not be listed as Aslo, but it's open to any attendee at the meeting there. And everything else, I'll try to post it as it comes up.
Awesome. Well, Brian, this was a very fun chat, and I'm amazed by how much value you put in it. I'm sure the listeners are like, wow, this was a 40-minute well worth listening.
I hope so. And thank you for inviting me on, Tulio. I love sharing this stuff. And
it's obvious that you do it.
Okay. Well, that's a little bit of what I'm preaching here, is express your emotion. And hopefully you and the audience picks up, even if you're just listening, you pick up on the fact that this guy is really excited about this improv crap, for whatever. That excitement leads you to pay more attention to it. And as soon as you're paying more attention to it, hopefully my message gets to you more. That's evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology. We're trained as mammals, we're adapted rather as mammals to look at other mammals and read their nonverbals. So is that person's face showing concern? I need to be concerned. Is that person's face showing glee? Oh, they maybe found a new food source or whatever. Is that person open to propagating my genes? That's the other instinct that I need to, we are constantly reading the nonverbal elements of every human we deal with. Rarely do we process it consciously, but we're always processing, right? So you're talking to another human being, and all their nonverbal elements of communication are landing on your audience, and you could use that to hopefully engage them more, or you can disregard that and you're probably going to lean towards less engagement, which is less effective for you.
Well said, Brian. I think it's a good time to wrap things up.
Great.
It was great to have you, and I look forward to meeting you again in some conference around the world.
Me too, my friend.
Hopefully also on a nice beach like it was in Palma.
Palma was wonderful, yeah. I would love to see you at the next conference.
All right. Have a great rest of your day, and bye, everyone. It was great to have you here for the 4th issue of SWIPE SciComm. Thank you for being here.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Tulio.
Ciao.